Hands up all those, you've heard about the aha moment that Corinne talked about. So hands up all of those who have that when you're doing something like standing in the shower, having a shave, sitting on the toilet, right? Right? Hands up those who have it while you're perhaps at the gym or going for a run or something like that. Right? Quite a few people. So this whole notion of your brain working when you're doing a repetitive function. So now hands up those of you who have your aha moment whilst you're at work. I think I just finished my presentation, right? Basically what you want to think about. So perhaps remote working with everybody sitting in a shower having a run at the same time or something isn't such a bad thing. My presentation is based around a line from a very, very good book called The Future of Management by Hamill and Breen. And so I decided to call the presentation The Future of Management. No sooner had I typed up that in the PowerPoint template, but I thought, no, actually, that's not true. It's not the future of management, it's the present of management, because the reality is, as you will see, some very smart companies are already doing this stuff. For some of you, it might be the future of management, but it sure as hell is where management needs to be. It's turned on, yeah. There we go. So this is the line. Right now, your company has 21st century internet-enabled business processes, mid-20th century management processes, and the key line is all built atop 19th century management principles. If you haven't read the book, well worth reading. So I just want to explore momentarily what those principles are. And so extract from the book what the principle is, what the goal, and what the application is. Standardisation is the first one, where the goal is efficiency, reliability, and quality, and it's around minimising variation. So you know about these things. This should not be news to you. Specialisation. The object exercise to reduce complexity, and so we group like activities together. Third is goal alignment, so ensure congruence, top to bottom, so we have cascading objectives. If I keep doing this, you just keep doing your bit. The notion of the hierarchy, the pyramid of authority, in order to maintain control. Planning and control, so conformance to plans, track and correct deviations. Yeah, I didn't even click it. Extrinsic rewards, so motivate effort, and ensure compliance, so financial rewards for achieving outcomes. So if you think about your organisation, the extent to which your organisation is foundationed on those key principles, they are very, very common. Okay? Now, it might be worth thinking about, and this was the point that Hamill and Breen are making, is that those principles are now 100 years old, right? So in fact, it is 100 years since 1915. So in February, so what else was going on at the same time? In February 1915, the first trans-America telephone call was made. And that's what they looked like as they made that momentous telephone call, right? To this. So that's where I'm going to read this so that I get it accurate, but you can see this through any Google function. By the time I finished making this particular statement, 347,222 tweets will have been made. 216,000 new photos will have been uploaded on Instagram. $133,436 will have been earned by Amazon. 3 days worth of new video will have been uploaded on YouTube, and 138,436 hours of video will be watched. And I'm nearly finished. 4.1 Google searches will have undertaken. 3.8 million pieces of content will have been posted on Facebook. 571 new websites will have been created, and 204,000 email will have been sent. And that sometimes feels like it's just for you, right? So in 100 years, we've gone from these guys sitting there in their suits and dinner suits and ties to make a telephone call from New York to Los Angeles or San Francisco, I can't remember which, to all of that stuff went on in 60 seconds. Okay. So the world has changed. Thus, this we're 21st century internet enabled, but built upon 19th century management principles. And beyond that, not only has the technology changed, but the sociology of the world has changed. And it's shifted from an emphasis on obedience and approval or authority to one of realisation of potential. Those of you that are of my generation will well remember when you went out to school or you went out after school to play with your friends, your mother would say to you, now make sure you've got clean underpants on in case you get run over by a bus. Remember that? This notion of compliance, authority, approval. I mean, I'm sure that the newspaper would have said, poor Shaun McCarthy was run over by a bus in Moody's Avenue, Whangarei, and can you believe it, he had dirty underpants on, right? Why the hell was that so important? But it was. So now, our children are all about, you can do anything, any kid can grow up to be president of the United States kind of thing. It's all about self-esteem, it's all about building a sense of self and realisation of potential, etc. And so here's the next point, is that those 100-year-old philosophies of management fly in stark contrast to how we know people are motivated. So the left-hand side of those principles, the right-hand side are the fundamentals of positive motivation. So we know from 57 years of research, right, that everybody's motivated to do something. It's a question of what are they motivated to do. Sometimes it's survival is the motivation. But what we want is a motivation where people can see and believe that their effort can make a difference, I can do something meaningful, etc., etc., etc. Okay? So let me show you, gee, that's quick, how that sort of plays out. So have a look at this list. Employment expectations of the incoming workforce. I don't need to read them to you, but opportunities for personal growth and challenging work. Equality, social significance, intrinsic rewards, now orientation, emotional, rational, balanced work-lifestyle stuff, and a preference for cooperative, competitive relations. Now, does that sound like Gen Y or the millenniums to you? If I put that into a document and said this is the beliefs and expectations of the incoming generations, what would you say? Would you agree with that? All right, let me tell you the next little fact. It was actually written in 1978 by Dr. J. Clayton Lafferty, who was the founder of Human Synergistics in Plymouth, Michigan, United States. Right. And what he was writing about is the baby boomers have different expectations of what is going to be part of their work experience than the preceding generations. 1978, where were you in 1978? A large number of you weren't even born. Right? So in fact, not a lot's changed. Right? Obviously the technology around it, so when we employ somebody, they expect a Microsoft Surface or an Apple iPad or something like that. When I was employed and asked what did I want, I said I wanted the latest statistical calculator. Because instead of adding all those numbers and subtracting all those numbers and square rooting all those numbers, I could just push a button and it would tell me what the standard deviation is. My God, that was heaven, right? So as the bottom paragraph says, what in God's name happened? Right? That my generation, from the 1960s, the most transformative decade probably in the history of, and certainly in modern history, right? Civil liberties, etc., came in with all these expectations in the 70s, and it didn't seem to happen because the cultures of organisations didn't allow it to happen. And that's how culture works. People come into organisations with these expectations, but they pretty soon learn that essentially you have to do this and you've got to do that, etc. So culture is how people believe they are expected to behave in order to fit in and get ahead. Okay? So I thought one way to look at that and the impact of these principles is through most organisations are trying to be somewhat more innovative with disruption, etc. So I'm looking at this from the context of not from the new, bright, young kid on the block kind of disruptive organisation, but us. I mean, we've been going for 40 years, right? And there are disruptions out there that we need to deal with. Your business has maybe been going for 100 years. So what I decided to do was to spend 3 months of this year, apart from doing everything else in my job, is to do a complete literature search through the academic literature on what are the organisational requirements for innovation. And they go something like this. Bottom line, external adaptability, because we're not talking about a new disruptive organisation. We're talking about your organisation, which is well established, being able to adapt to external shifts as an environment. So the first thing I found, and the most obvious thing I found, was organisational culture, a culture that makes innovation able to happen. Mission and vision, a sense of meaning and importance to what people do. The structure that allows people to have influence and involvement. Selection and training that supports flexibility and ambiguity. So we don't see maternity leave and employing old buggers like me as being a problem. It's an opportunity. How can we maximise that opportunity? So flexibility and ambiguity. Reinforcement systems that reward for risk-taking, and that's in inverted commas because it's contextual. So in a government department, risk might be speaking up when you see an issue. For my son who's a trader, risk might be how many billions do I play with today kind of thing. So it's contextual. Job designs that allows for autonomy, variety, identity at the individual level. Effective communication up and down that facilitates learning. It's not just facts and figures and that kind of stuff. The leadership that increases a sense of power in people. Collective effort through teamwork. Coordination across the organisation, so cross-functional coordination. Committed people who are motivated and people who are satisfied and emotionally attached to the firm. Okay? So 3 months of looking through all sorts of scientific journals, report articles, abstracts, etc. And this is all research-based stuff, it's not theoretical. The conclusion was those are the 12 things that organisations need to do to innovate. So I thought another way to look at it is, so what does it not look like? So what do you need to have in order to not have innovation happen? So here we go, same list, same 12 things. A culture that reinforces the status quo. Staff are disconnected from the mission and the values are seen as not real. Structures that create hierarchical and centralised influence, that pyramid stuff, right? Selection and training that is subjective and not transparent. Little reward for effort, but my God, you make a mistake, it's hell to pay, right? These are the principles: specialisation, standardisation and compartmentalisation in jobs. Communication that is filtered and largely about facts and figures, not learning. Leadership that is designed to control. Silos, internal competition, boring, unchallenging, unfulfilling jobs and disengaged people. And so the external adaptability issue is that the organisation is slow to respond and adapt to external pressures for change, okay? So the obvious question is, to what extent does that stuff describe elements of your organisation? Because therein lies your challenge. Thank you, Dean. So to put a graphic out of it, there are these 12 things. That's all you've got to do. You get those 12 things right, you're going to be able to innovate. And the innovation will lead to both ideas and action. So it's not just ideas, it's also enabling those ideas into action. So I looked at that and I thought, well, you know, that's a pretty big ask for most organisations. So how can I rethink that with a blinding flash of the obvious? What I realised I was looking at was a variation of what we call the How Culture Works model, which is the consequence of 27 years of research by Dr. Robert Cook at the university, first at the University of Michigan, then the University of Illinois in Chicago, around how culture actually works in an organisation. So using that 27 years of research, I reframed it. The first thing I want to note before I reframe it is that you need to understand this, if nothing else. Right? You do not aim for innovation. You aim for a culture that will allow innovation to happen. You must understand that innovation is an outcome of doing other things well. Right? So you take Microsoft as an example, and this is well documented in various books, where they have somewhat competitive teams operating throughout their organisational structure. The left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. By the time the product is delivered, then it will be a good product, right? It's an organisation that supplies excellent products. But anybody who works in the IT sector knows, don't buy the first version and wait till the bugs have been fixed. Right? That's what happens. Right? So the cost of fixing those bugs is quite enormous. So innovation is an outcome of doing certain things well. So let's have a look at the reframe and how that consequence of doing certain things well works. So on top of that 12-point list was organisational culture. That doesn't happen in isolation. In fact, we know from that 27 years of research that some of those elements, so I've kept those numbers associated with them, some of those elements are causes of organisational culture, but some of them are outcomes of organisational culture. So we can now reframe that 12-point model into 7 causal factors that cause the culture to be as it is, that lead to people working well in teams and communicating well across the organisation, that leads to the ability to innovate and create ideas and actions, etc., which then results in a genuine innovation like one of these things that works. It's probably the battery or something like that suddenly decided to die on us. Does that make sense? So we see it as that cause and effect. So now there's really 7 things. There's only 7 rather than 12 that you should be focusing on. You should be focusing on building a mission, vision, etc., that has genuine meaning for people in the organisation. It's got to be not bullshit. It's got to be real, right? So if we're going to have a vision and a mission that talks about integrity or cooperation or enablement or whatever the hell it is, then you've got to make sure that everything else is consistent with that, because if it's not, within 5 minutes the bullshit detector kicks in. You've got to have a structure that allows people to get involved and empowered, because if people are not involved, they're simply not going to be able to create innovations for you. You've got to have human resource practices, the reinforcement systems, the HR systems, etc., that enable people to act rather than be punished. Right? I mean, how many organisations refer to the annual performance review as the annual I got you now, you bastard exercise, right? So it's not working, because it's supposed to motivate. It in fact demotivates. I mean, I spent a day playing a round of golf with my son in London in between a couple of Rugby World Cup games last month. And he's a trader, right, so everything's about money, and it's bonus time. He spent the entire golf round moaning about what he thought his bonus was going to be and how unfair it was. And it's a lot of money. We're talking a very, very large amount of money here. Is there any motivational element in that bonus? Absolutely not, right? Crazy, etc., etc., etc. So let me give you an example of how culture limits innovation for you. So we can look at it from the how it doesn't work, right? So we're an organisation, whatever it might be, and we say we want people to be innovative and we want them to come up with ideas and blah, 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 right? But then we've got to look at the reality. If our organisational practices are alongside this stuff, so I've just taken some out of that, how to make culture not happen, so there's little shared meaning on what the organisation is striving to achieve. The structure allows for little influence, the job design allows for little autonomy, the emphasis on procedures rather than ideas, and the leadership allows a little involvement. You're going to end up with a culture that is what we would call passive, with little belief that personal effort can make a difference, and essentially the message from the culture is just do your job, right? So then you've really got to put a bubble above people's head that essentially say, what the fuck? So you put me in a job that does not require me to think, kind of stuff, right? Every time I go to my manager with an idea, he says, look, just bugger off and do your job, and all that kind of stuff that goes on in everyday life. And now you want me to be innovative? You've got to be kidding. Right? So culture is about expectations. How do people believe they are expected to behave? So if I believe that I'm expected to simply, for instance, do the procedure and follow the rules even if I think they're wrong, nothing on God's earth is going to make me innovative until we change that culture, okay? So coming back to this little subtitle, or in some cases, smart organisations, the present. So we're back to this list, and we're just going to circle one of them, which is organisational mission. Now you have in your kit bag, I believe, our book, Why Culture and Leadership Matters. And that's a very, very fascinating book because it's full of data. So if you're a data nerd like me, you're going to love it. If you're not, have a skim through it at some stage. But I'm just going to take one, because you can measure this stuff. That's the important thing. You can measure this stuff. So I'm going to take one element, mission and vision, okay? So we're going to set up this causal factors, the culture, and the outcomes equation, if you like. And we're only taking 1 out of 31 causal factors. So it doesn't work in isolation, as the slide may suggest, but it's pretty close. So here's the first graph. So basically, I took a 940 sample size out of our 2,500 Australian and New Zealand organisations that we work with. So randomly selected 940. Right? And looked at the scores for mission and vision that people had given them in their survey data. So there's the bottom 10%. There's the 10% that scored the lowest. There's the global average. There's the high-performing sort of average. That's where organisations who are performing very well are scoring. And there's where the top 10%, so the most effective articulation of mission and vision are happening. And these are real companies. So there's 94 in the green-blue bar, and those that know our models will know why I'm using those colours, the green-red bar, sorry. And there's 94 organisations in that blue bar at the bottom. Dean. And so those that do know the circumplex will know exactly what this says, but in short order, those with low articulation of mission, low mission and vision, create defensive cultures, green and red. Passive defensive, aggressive defensive, where basically it's about security. So if you ask me to make a decision, my first thought's going to be which decision is going to get me in the least trouble, right? The top 10%, on the other hand, create a very constructive culture. So there you ask me to solve a problem, my thought will be how do I effectively solve that problem, right? And then we relate that to those outcomes. So you can see one of these 7 things that cause it from the innovation side, mission, impact on culture, and now let's have a look at the impact on those outcomes. So you can see again where the bottom 10%, the green-red, the global average, the high-performing benchmark, and where the top 10%. So just look at the difference between the green-red bar and the blue bar on all of those. Teamwork, inter-unit coordination, motivation, satisfaction, and the ultimate outcome, which is the measure of ability to innovate, is the external adaptability. Okay? So if you get some things right, like those 7 things, and this is just but one example, organisational mission, then you will help create a constructive culture which will give you those outcomes. So my message as I depart the stage to catch a flight, I haven't actually coughed, which is pretty cool. Maybe I should just talk all day. We've known for a long time that there are certain ways of organising work and managing people. Remember that stuff that Clay Lafferty wrote in 1978 that actually produce outstanding results. Those organisations and managers who continue to do so at their own peril. Or if it's not at their peril, it'll be at the peril of their stakeholders, their customers or their suppliers or their owners or whoever. So thank you very much for listening, and I hope that's been valuable for you.